The clock inside San Quentin does not tick the way clocks do outside. It clicks. Sharp. Final. Like a nail being tapped into wood. Marcus Reed sits on the edge of a steel bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor because looking at the walls makes the space feel smaller. The light above him never turns off. It hums, low and steady, like it's watching. His hands are still, but his body isn't. Something deep inside him keeps pacing, even when he doesn't move. On his chest, black ink spreads across pale skin. A broken clock tattooed directly over his heart. No hands, no numbers, just a cracked circle, frozen forever. He got it 5 years ago, after his third appeal failed. At the time, it felt honest. Tonight it feels cruel. A guard walks past his cell. Keys rattle. Marcus doesn't look up. He already knows the sound of those keys. He's memorized every step, every pause, every breath this place takes. He knows which footsteps mean count, which mean shall, which mean nothing at all, and which ones mean the end. In less than 12 hours, the state of California plans to kill him. Not because he's violent right now, not because he's dangerous anymore, but because of something the system decided years ago, sealed in paper, stamped and signed. Marcus presses his thumb into the ink on his chest until it hurts, just to feel something real. His arms are covered in tattoos, names, dates, symbols carved during endless nights when time stopped making sense. A raven wraps around his forearm. A woman's name is crossed out on his wrist. Along his ribs, thin tally marks run like scars, counting years spent waiting to die. Waiting is the part no one warns you about. Not the fear, not the pain, the waiting. The waiting that stretches minutes into hours, hours into years. The waiting that changes how your mind works. The waiting that teaches you how to live with death sitting quietly in the corner of the room, saying nothing, just watching. Somewhere down the tier, a man coughs. Somewhere else, someone whispers a prayer. The prison exhales, old and tired. Marcus closes his eyes and wonders something that scares him more than dying itself. What if the execution isn't the punishment? What if the punishment was everything that came before it? Marcus Reed arrived at San Quentin before the sun came up. The bus rolled through fog so thick it swallowed the road. The water somewhere to the left unseen, but felt cold and close. No one spoke. Chains clinked softly each time the bus shifted, a sound that followed Marcus into his sleep for years after. When the gates finally appeared, tall and stained, they didn't open fast. They never did. Waiting began before anyone stepped off the bus. When Marcus's feet touched the ground, the cold went straight through the thin prison shoes and into his bones. Guards shouted names, not looking at faces. Men became paperwork the moment they crossed the line. Marcus kept his eyes forward, jaw tight. He had learned that already. Don't look lost, don't look scared, don't look angry. All three invited attention. Inside, the prison smelled like bleach and rust. The walls were old, older than anyone there, holding decades of voices that never left. Marcus passed tiers stacked with steel doors, each one a mouth that could scream or stay silent. He felt smaller with every step, like the building was slowly folding him into itself. Death Row wasn't announced. There was no sign, no speech. Just a long corridor and a door that closed behind him with a sound that didn't echo. It absorbed the noise, the way the place absorbed people. His cell was barely wide enough to stretch his arms. Concrete on all sides. A steel toilet. A sink that coughed brown water before turning clear. A thin mattress sealed in plastic, already sagging in the middle. The light above buzzed constantly, never fully bright, never fully dark. Time didn't live here the way it did outside. Marcus sat on the bunk and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. Hours passed. Or minutes. He couldn't tell. A tray slid through the slot. He ate without tasting. A guard counted him, eyes flicking to the clipboard, not his face. Somewhere down the tier, someone laughed too loud too long. Someone else told him to shut up. The sound traveled and died quickly, swallowed by concrete. That first night, Marcus didn't sleep. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling, watching a crack shaped like a lightning bolt. He traced it over and over with his eyes, afraid that if he closed them, the walls would move closer. He told himself this was temporary. His lawyer had said so. The case wasn't clean. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence felt thin. Appeals would come. Years could pass. Decades even. Marcus held on to that word. Years, like it was solid. He woke to the sound of keys. Morning on Death Row didn't feel like morning. The light didn't change. The air didn't shift. Only the routine told you the day had turned. Count. Tray. Silence. Another count. Marcus learned the rhythm fast. He learned how to move slow, how to keep his hands visible, how to speak just loud enough to be heard but not noticed. He learned the men. There was Calvin 2 cells down, arms covered in ink, so dense the skin looked black. Saints mixed with skulls. Dates scratched, crooked and faded. Calvin talked through the vent at night, voice calm, like he'd made peace with the walls. There was Eli across the tier, who prayed out loud every evening, his voice cracking on the same words. There was a man everyone called Teacher, who read law books like novels and never stopped smiling. Marcus listened more than he spoke. Weeks passed, then months. Time didn't move forward so much as press inward. Marcus felt it in his chest, in the way his thoughts circled the same places. He started working out just to feel his body doing something real. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats in the narrow space between bunk and door. Sweat soaked into concrete that never dried. When boredom turned sharp, he started tattooing. Ink was hard to come by, but time made men creative. Soot from burned paper. Shampoo. A sharpened staple. The pain grounded him. Made minutes real. The first tattoo was small, a raven on his forearm, wings tucked in tight. It felt right. Raven survived on scraps. Ravens watched. More followed. A woman's name crossed out on his wrist. A line of tally marks along his ribs. One for every year he told himself he would be here. On his chest, over his heart, a broken clock with no hands. He got that one after his first appeal filing. It wasn't supposed to mean anything dark, just honesty. The waiting changed people. Marcus watched men age without moving. Hair turned gray, then white. Hands shook, eyes dulled. Some men got loud, filling the space with anger like noise could push time back. Others shrank, voices fading until guards had to call their names twice. Every now and then, the tier went quiet in a way that felt wrong. That was when a gurney came through. No announcements, no explanation, just guards moving faster than usual, faces tight. Marcus never saw the faces of the men on those gurneys. He saw shoes, socks, sometimes a foot hanging at a wrong angle. The silence afterward was heavier than the noise before. At night, screams came from nowhere and everywhere. Men woke up crying. Men shouted at ghosts. Marcus learned to lie still, breathing slow, pretending the sounds weren't reaching into his cell. The first appeal decision came on a Tuesday. He was called to a small gray room with a phone bolted to the wall. His lawyer's voice sounded thin, distant, like it was traveling through water. The appeal was denied. There would be another attempt. The system moved slow. Marcus nodded, even though no one could see him. When the call ended, he didn't move. Back in his cell, he sat on the floor with his back against the bunk, staring at the raven on his arm. That night, he carved a thin line into its wing, blood pooling dark before he wiped it away. The pain was clean, controlled. Calvin noticed the next day. First cut hurts the most, he said quietly through the vent. Marcus didn't answer. He told himself it was still early. Still time. Still years. But as the days stacked up, something shifted. Hope stopped feeling solid. It started feeling like a habit, and habits are easy to lose. One morning, a guard stopped at Marcus's cell longer than usual. Didn't say anything. Just looked at him, then moved on. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest that didn't go away. That afternoon, his name came over the speaker again. This time it wasn't for Yard. It was for the phone. And Marcus already knew that whatever waited on the other end would make the waiting heavier than it had ever been before. The voice on the phone didn't rush. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. His lawyer spoke slowly, carefully, like each word had weight and couldn't be dropped. The appeal had been reviewed. The arguments were heard. The court had decided. Marcus listened without interrupting, his fingers gripping the edge of the metal shelf beneath the phone. Denied. The The word landed softly, but it stayed. His lawyer kept talking about options, about next steps, about timelines that stretched out like thin thread. Marcus nodded, even though no one could see him. He said, "Okay," in the right places. When the call ended, the dial tone filled the room longer than it should have. Back in his cell, Marcus lay on the bunk and stared at the underside of the mattress above him, the springs pressing dark shapes through the plastic. The denial didn't feel like a shock. It felt like confirmation, like something the prison had already known and was only now letting him in on. That night, the tear was loud, not shouting, talking. Low voices moving through vents, through walls, through the thin spaces between cells. Men traded news the way they always did, in fragments and half-truths. Someone asked Marcus if he was good. Someone else said the courts were a joke. Someone laughed, sharp and bitter. Marcus didn't respond. He lay still and listened to his own thoughts circle the same drain. He told himself this was just one loss. One step. There were more appeals. Years still stretched ahead. But the word denied kept repeating, tapping against the inside of his skull like that clock on the wall. The tattoos changed after that. Before, they had been markers. Memory. Identity. Now they became armor. Marcus added ink whenever the nights grew too long to bear. Lines along his ribs turned into numbers. Numbers into dates. The broken clock on his chest grew darker, thicker, as if time itself was sinking into his skin. He stopped counting days. He counted men instead. Men who lost weight without trying. Men who talked to people who weren't there. Men who stopped leaving their bunks. One afternoon, Marcus watched guards pull a man from his cell, arms limp, eyes open but empty. The man didn't fight, didn't speak. He was alive but barely. That was when Marcus understood something no one ever said out loud. Death Row didn't kill you all at once. It took pieces. Visits became anchors. His sister came when she could, her face changing a little more each time. New lines. Tired eyes. She tried to be strong, tried to talk about ordinary things, traffic, work, the weather. Marcus listened and nodded and pretended those things still belonged to him. When she left, the quiet felt louder than before. The second appeal failed without ceremony. No phone call this time. Just a letter slid through the slot, folded clean and official. Marcus read it twice, then once more out loud, like speaking it might change the shape of the words. It didn't. Calvin stopped by the vent that night. "You still in there?" he asked. Marcus waited a long time before answering. "Yeah." "That's enough," Calvin said. Marcus carved another line into the raven's wing. Years passed in this way. Loss layered on loss until the days felt heavy even when nothing happened. The prison routines never changed, but Marcus did. He noticed it in the mirror, in the way his eyes no longer searched for anything. He noticed it in his dreams, which shrank down to small spaces and sharp sounds. Then one morning, a guard he didn't recognize stopped at Marcus's cell. "Pack up," the guard said. Marcus froze. "For what?" "Just pack." The word just didn't belong there. Marcus folded his few belongings slowly. Letters, drawings, a book with Calvin's sketches tucked inside. His hands were steady, but his chest felt hollow. He was moved down corridors he didn't recognize, past doors he'd never seen open. The room they brought him to was quiet. Clean. Too clean. The warden sat behind a desk, papers neatly stacked. Marcus stood until he was told to sit. The chair felt bolted to the floor, like everything else in this place. The warden spoke calmly. Explained the process. Explained the timeline. Explained the words Marcus had been circling for years, but never fully touched. Execution date. Marcus focused on the sound of the warden's voice, not the meaning. It felt easier that way. He nodded when appropriate. He asked one question, when, and wrote the date down when told, just to prove it was real. Back in his cell, the air felt different. Men looked at him longer now. Some nodded. Some looked away. The news traveled fast. Death Row had a way of knowing these things before they were spoken. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every sound felt closer. Every step outside his cell made his muscles tighten. He started waking before count, heart racing, convinced it was time. He stopped adding tattoos. There was no space left that didn't already carry weight. His sister visited again. This time, Neither of them pretended. She cried. Marcus held his hand against the glass and waited for the moment when words would fail. When she left, he didn't watch her go. The final weeks blurred together. Marcus met with a chaplain he didn't believe in, a counselor who asked him how he felt. Marcus told the truth he didn't know anymore. Feelings came and went too fast to name. Relief sometimes, fear sometimes, mostly something dull and heavy like standing underwater. The night before the date, the prison felt like it was holding its breath. Marcus lay on his bunk and traced the cracks in the ceiling one last time. He thought about the man he'd been before the bus, before the fog, before the waiting. He wondered when that man had left. Then came the footsteps, closer than usual. Keys, voices, a pause outside his cell. Marcus sat up slowly, heart steady in a way that surprised him. He swung his legs down and stood before anyone told him to. He faced the door, hands loose at his sides. The lock didn't turn. A guard cleared his throat. "Read," he said, voice low. "There's been a stay." The words hung there, unfinished. Marcus felt the ground tilt beneath him. "How long?" he asked. The guard shook his head. "Temporary." The footsteps moved away. The door stayed closed. Marcus sat back down on his bunk, breath shaking now, relief and dread tangling until he couldn't tell them apart. The date was gone, but nothing felt lighter. The waiting rushed back in, heavier than before. And Marcus realized something that made his chest tighten. Surviving the execution had been easy. Surviving what came after might not be. After the stay, time broke. Not all at once. Not loudly. It fractured in small, quiet ways that Marcus didn't notice until he couldn't put it back together again. The first thing that changed was sleep, or the lack of it. Marcus lay on his bunk night after night, eyes open, body exhausted, mind wide awake. His execution date was gone, erased with a single sentence, but his body didn't believe it. Every sound still felt like a warning. Every footstep outside his cell sent a pulse of heat through his chest. He had prepared himself to die. No one had prepared him to keep living. The men on the tier didn't know how to treat him now. Some congratulated him in low voices, as if he'd won something. Others avoided him entirely, like death might still be contagious. Calvin drew another portrait and slid it through the bars. A clock this time, cracked down the middle, its hands bent backward. "Second life's harder," Calvin said through the vent. "First one ends clean." Marcus understood what he meant. The prison routines resumed, but Marcus no longer fit inside them the same way. Count still came. Chow still slid through the slot. Yard still happened when his name was called. But everything felt temporary now, unstable. He flinched less at loud noises, but more at quiet ones. Silence became dangerous. Silence meant thinking. The stay didn't erase the date. It replaced it with uncertainty. Weeks passed, then months. No new date came. No news at all, most days. The waiting stretched wider than it ever had before. Before, the end had a shape. Now, it was a shadow that could step forward at any moment. Marcus started noticing the psychological damage more clearly in others, and in himself. Men who'd survived stays before him moved differently. Slower, more cautious, like animals that had escaped a trap and never stopped feeling the teeth. One man down the tier began packing his belongings every night, then unpacking them every morning, just in case. Another refused to leave his bunk at all, staring at the wall like it was a screen only he could see. Marcus caught himself doing small, strange things. He memorized the exact number of steps between his bunk and the door. He stopped starting books, afraid of not finishing them. He flinched when guards said his name, even casually. The tattoos on his body began to feel heavier, like they were no longer decorations but records. Evidence of a mind trying to stay intact. The broken clock on his chest felt almost alive now, pressing against his ribs when his heart beat too fast. His sister noticed the change immediately. On her next visit, she studied his face through the glass longer than usual. "You look different," she said carefully. Marcus shrugged. He didn't know how to explain that death had loosened its grip just enough to make him afraid again. That certainty had been replaced by anticipation, and anticipation was cruel. They talked about nothing important. Weather, traffic, a cousin's new baby. Ordinary life felt unreal, like fiction. When the visit ended, Marcus felt a familiar hollow open in his chest, but this time it stayed longer. Back on the tier, rumors began to circulate. Executions restarting. Court schedules shifting. New protocols. Men traded information like gamblers watching a bad deck. Marcus listened without reacting. Hope had become dangerous. Fear had learned how to wait. One night, a man a few cells down began screaming. Not shouting, screaming. The sound ripped through the tier, raw and animal, filled with words that didn't make sense. Guards rushed in. Lights flared brighter. The screaming stopped suddenly, cut off like a switch had been flipped. The next morning, the man's cell was empty. No explanation. Marcus stared at the door long after count ended. He felt something inside him tighten, lock into place. He understood then that death row didn't just punish crimes. It punished endurance. The mind was the real battlefield, and time was the weapon. Marcus tried to fight back in small ways. He forced himself to keep a routine. Exercised even when his body resisted. Wrote letters, even if he never sent them. Talked to Calvin at night, just to hear another human voice say his name like it still mattered. But some nights the thoughts won. He imagined the execution room in detail, the straps, the lights, the quiet professionalism. He imagined surviving again, and again, and again, each time losing a little more of himself. He wondered which fate was worse. Then, one afternoon, a guard stopped at his cell. Not Harris. Someone new. "Reed," the guard said. "You've got a visit." Marcus's chest tightened. Visits were scheduled. Predictable. This wasn't. He followed the guard down corridors that smelled cleaner than the rest of the prison, past offices where people still used first names. They brought him to a room he hadn't been in before. Inside waited two people, a man in a suit, and his lawyer. The lawyer didn't smile. Marcus sat down slowly, pulse loud in his ears. He recognized the look immediately, the careful posture, the controlled breathing. This wasn't good news. The man in the suit introduced himself and began speaking in practice sentences. Legal language, court language, words designed to soften sharp things. Marcus listened, barely hearing anything except one phrase repeated again and again. The state was moving forward. No date yet, but soon. When the meeting ended, Marcus walked back to his cell on legs that didn't feel like his own. The tier looked the same, sounded the same, smelled the same. But Marcus knew something fundamental had shifted. The waiting was changing shape again. That night, he sat on his bunk and stared at the broken clock tattooed over his heart. He pressed his thumb into the ink until the pain grounded him, anchoring him to the moment. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization settled. The state might take his life, but the waiting was already taking his mind. And this time, there might not be a stay to save him from it. Night settles over San Quentin, thick and heavy, but the lights never truly go out. Marcus Reed sits on the edge of his steel bunk, shoulders tense, staring at the cracked ceiling. The broken clock tattooed over his heart seems to pulse with every distant footstep. Somewhere in the tier, a man coughs. Another whispers a prayer. The prison exhales around him, old and patient, holding the weight of every life it has touched. Marcus traces his tattoos with his fingers, feeling each line, each scar, every mark of waiting and survival. Time doesn't pass here. It presses, shapes, and teaches lessons that the world outside can't imagine. Every man on this row is learning the same truth. Death may come, but the waiting is what truly tests a person. He leans back, closes his eyes, and lets the quiet fill him. Outside, the fog rolls off the water, pressing against the walls. Inside, the tier hums softly. Life continues, fragile and unsteady, yet unbroken. If Marcus's story made you feel the weight of life and time, if it gave you a glimpse into what waiting on death row really does, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and follow the channel for more real stories that the world doesn't tell. Because the walls of San Quentin may hold Marcus, but these stories deserve to escape.